Hello, today is November 20th, 2023. I'm meeting today with Mr. Dale Johnke at his home in Loveland, Colorado. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer for the Northern Colorado Veterans History Project. Welcome, Dale. Thanks for sitting down today to tell your story. If we could, let's start out. Tell us a bit about yourself, your date of birth, where you were born, a little bit about your family.
The story starts in Flatwillow, Montana, 50 miles north of Billings, in 1932. I was born without a doctor. I had a midwife there who did the job, and more or less said I was born in a manger. But we lived on that farm, and we saw all kinds of weird snowstorms and grasshopper plagues that went through till they covered everything in sight, including the crops. And life was good until twin sisters were born 1 year later, a little later than that, and all action stops on you because the twins take it all. So
you're the oldest?
No, I'm in the middle of the litter.
Oh, okay.
And so as a result, being born after I had a twins, you become nothing.
Yeah, right.
And so I had to live with nothing. But I remember things from when my twin sisters were filmed at about 3 months of age in a rocking chair back in Flatwillow out on the farm. And I got a good memory.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing all kinds of things from that period of time. But it was okay until Dad decided we wanted to move to this new irrigation project that they started at Fairfield, Montana, when they built the Gibson Dam up in the mountains and irrigate thousands of acres. And he was one of hundreds that moved out of the community to go into farmers' farm home administration assisted farming. So we became from drylanders to irrigated, and that worked out good till mother had her 10th child, and I was 7 years old, and she was in the hospital 7 days and died from childbed fever. Oh. And so I'm thinking, well, how's this going to turn out? And my twin sisters were about to be farmed out to kin in South Dakota. And the youngest one was raised by an aunt in Denver. And so Dad decided, can't do that, I'm going to keep it all together. And he did. And he changed from just irrigated farming, converted it to a dairy farm. Voila. You get a monthly milk check off of a dairy farm project. And so that was a smart move. And I helped him install the equipment in the barn and all that. And I learned a lot just by accident from him. He was very mechanically minded. And so that went on until I came into graduation at a place called Fairfield High School, and I decided in my junior year with 2 other future shipmates, in fact, that in April before the May year was up, we hate school, it's too nice to be in school, so let's abort and go to Kansas and drive tractors. So we went there. We got there in western Kansas, and it was rainy, and we decided we stayed there 2 weeks, and we decided, gee whiz, we'll never get to work, so let's go back to Montana and northern Montana to do the same thing on Dryland. In the meantime, I thought Dad would be chasing us, or somebody would be, and he let us alone, and the other folks' parents let us alone to do our thing. So that summer, I spent up next to the Canadian border dodging rattlesnakes and farming dryland. Oh, that was different. Dryland farming, but I got used to it. And the snakes would come out of orifices everywhere and nip at you when they could get close enough. Crawling on the ground, big old bull snakes. But I got through that, and then that was when I started, I went back to the town of Chinook, where Alice is from, and got a job to finish the season after the dryland farming is over, irrigating for people there in Chinook. And at the time, I didn't know anything about Alice. And this was 1949, and I'm on my way hitchhiking down to Texas. So in Great Falls, I decided to take a breather at a park and then City Park, here comes an old classmate. And he said, what you doing and where are you headed? And he says, well, I'm going out to where you used to live on the Fairfield bench by Fairfield. And so I said, okay, I'll ride with you there. And then he was planning to go to Helena. That was my jumping. So he gets to a critical junction. He says, this time you see your dad. Spun off the main road 3 miles later. We're alongside home. Dad's out irrigating, smiling to see me. Wasn't mad at all, and so we had a very cordial meeting. But I thought, well, I better finish my mission and we'll talk later. And so later, I ran into influences that said, you got to finish high school. So I go back into high school, and that senior year, I had to do double duty and make up for the last half of the junior year. I still graduated third in the class even after that experience, and so stupid. But anyway, I was chasing the postmaster's daughter shortly after that after that I went into the Navy, 4 of us.
Well, so now, for a time frame reference, this is 1950?
This is June 19th, 1950, 4 days before the Korean War started. So we went through boot training in San Diego, and I'm fascinated by these palm trees. You know, I didn't know there was such a thing.
Well, sorry to interrupt you, but that leads to the question. Here is this Dryland boy. How did you come to choose the Navy as a service branch of all the branches?
I was reading handbooks, you know. Air Force was our first choice. But when we went to the Great Falls recruiting station, nobody from Air Force was on duty. So here's a petty office over here right across the hall, and he says, come over, boys, let's chat. So he accidentally got his quota filled that day. It was strange. And he talked us into it, and that was okay too. Actually, I found out later on it was a good move, because the Navy, you don't want to be on shore anywhere. I realized that later on. No Army, no Marine Corps.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of Navy through the corpsmen that were with the Marine Corps as medics.
Right.
And I didn't want to become a medic, and I didn't know it at the time, but I became a storekeeper. And they take care of the ship's accounting for supplies coming aboard, except ordnance. So that was my main job in the Navy.
Well, let me back up because I interrupted you. You took off for boot camp. And how was that transition going from the carefree life as a civilian into military life? Was that much of a transition for you?
Oh, all of us were saying, what the hell did we do? 4 o'clock in the morning reveille? What did we do to ourselves? And then one guy didn't say much until a month later. He said, well, I was 17 when we enlisted, and therefore I don't serve 4 years. I served 3 years and a fraction. And that got to us, but that's the way it was. And we both became storekeepers on the same ship, on the Walke, by luck. But we had to take the Walke out of mothballs because they were really trying to get ready for Korea. So we took that thing out of mothballs, and everything was covered with plastic and oil. Quite an experience just getting that out. So after I graduated from boot camp in October, I went on board the Walke, and then went into this messy job of cleaning that ship up until New Year's. And New Year's, we set sail for the Orient. That was my first time out of the country, stopping at Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
Really, that was a big wow too.
And that leads to the question. Once I go back to this inland dry farmer going to sea, did you get your sea legs, or how was that initial trip out?
I never got seasick.
Really?
I enjoyed that, bouncing up and down. You go up a ladder, light as a feather, and the next moment you'd be heavy as lead in your pants. So that was okay with me. Everybody else seemed to get seasick. This farm kid didn't know there was such a thing.
Yeah,
so I endured that.
And you'd mentioned earlier too that when I unfortunately interrupted you, getting to San Diego and seeing palm trees. So you got San Diego and Hawaii. I mean, these exotic lands to a Montana farm boy.
Oh man, that was just like paradise. And you bet that was something else again. We did get to stop at the island of Midway, which was home to the Goonie birds and not much vegetation and all that. A refueling stop is what that was. And then we hit a typhoon 500 miles out of Tokyo Bay, and that was not good news. I didn't even realize it. But our ship was doing 45-degree rolls, and you had to hold on to a railing to make sure you didn't get washed overboard. And one destroyer lost a man overboard, and ours the latter part of the ship's bulkhead was smashed in by waves where the post office was by that second stack. And so we had repairs to get done in Yokosuka, Japan. That typhoon just about took us down because we were getting low on fuel and we were deviating our route into Tokyo Bay with the fleet. But we got the typhoon finally passed over and we were okay, got into Yokosuka and went into dry dock for a period of a month, I think. And then after that,
well, I'll keep interrupting because I got all these questions. So you're in dry dock for a month. Did that give you the opportunity to get out and explore Japan at all? Or
a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was so different. And I saw a Texaco oil station there. I thought, really? In this land of the Goonie birds? Oh my gosh, that was a shock.
Huh.
But we soon realized it was a land of cheap binoculars and glassware, and we were stocking up on that stuff. Well, then from there, after we got repaired, we even had keel damage, so we got that repaired, and then we went out to Westpac up the North Korean peninsula, and we spent a lot of time just throwing 5-inch projectiles 12 miles inland at different targets that we had. One night they had a starlight on for night. That was interesting because those things stay and they float down, and it's just like a giant light bulb in the sea.
Wow.
So we're firing at troop movements and things, and in this port called Wonsan, North Korea, that was one of their main ports. We spent a lot of time at anchor there, and when we did that, they would fire at us and we'd pull anchor. We lost an anchor there once upon a time, and we would refuel there and we'd get positions there. Supply ship came in one time with frozen oranges, and so we're pitching them back at the crew on that ship because we thought, well, you cheated us out of fresh fruit here. One night though, when we were firing, there was a big blast on shore, and we had a troop concentration. I figure it was 2,500 troops and ammo in there, and it was a big lucky strike, you know. But I guess those gun control directors, they can zero in on targets, and they can do incredibly well with directional fire. And one of the 4 shipmates was a fire controlman, and he got lucky because he spent a whole year in Navy school, the longest Navy school to get it. And I had a brother-in-law on a USS California who was a fire controlman right on top part of the mast of the ship, you know, directing fire. And he was on the California when it was sunk on Pearl Harbor Day.
Wow.
But he was off getting ready for church, so they thought he was missing. They sent telegrams home thinking it, but he was on shore, shacked up. So he was happy. He was alone, and he made it. So then, where did we go after? Oh.
Now, when you guys were firing and I guess in battle, what was your battle stage? You were storekeeper by trade, but where was your battle station then?
It changed. I started out with these 5-inch projectiles on below deck, throwing the casing in there about that long and that big around, and then the projectile was the same thing, and we put them into the loader.
Oh, geez.
And you know, one night there was a kid from North Carolina who disobeyed instructions. He had his hands on top of a projectile when he slammed it in, and guess what? It just chopped 2 fingers off. I can still see him looking at that in absolute shock. Well, he got taken care of later, but yeah. All right, we had a medic on board, and I think there were 2. There was a petty officer grade medic and then a lesser fellow that knew medicine, and so they took care of him until we got back into port. But that was awful to see that, because it pulled out everything up to his elbow, and up in the gun mount they said, what the heck? They knew right away somebody got pulled apart on there, and that's what it was. So
you were down below. You would load that went up the elevator to the gun. Okay.
But then later on, then I got a little clout and became a storekeeper, strayer. When you're trying to get a grade, I got elevated to the bridge on binoculars and on the captain's phones, and that's where I was the day we took our hit.
Okay.
See, because this was in February of '51 to June of '51, June 12th of '51 when our action happened, and So we were in and out of Yokosuka and in and out of Korea, and we ended up being in the Korean waters on the 12th of June, and that's what that story was
Yeah,
about.
and we'll get
We're
to
launching
that.
aircraft. We just finished launching aircraft on North Korea, and so as a result of that, boom, we got this great big boom out on the rear end of the ship, and there was confusion in the record. Was that a mine? Because there were floating mines out there. You could see them. We were shooting at them too. And there was also submarine contacts out there. So that's why the story became such a secret story, a top secret story.
Right.
Were the the Soviets trying to start more war? Right then and there was a real question mark, because the war was a year old.
Yeah, right.
Just 1 year old. And that was a big question. Are they really? And Stalin was still alive. And so they muzzled us, censored our mail, told the newspapers to talk about it, and people forgot about it, and our story never got out. Because for 45 years I said nothing to nobody, not sure of Navy scuttlebutt.
Yeah. Wow.
But later on, Navy scuttlebutt had it pretty well down, and we had it figured out. Yeah, that wasn't a mine, even though there are mines out there. We had all kinds of things in the debris field after we got into Sasebo, Japan. They flew some Navy divers out from Washington to study the damage, to see what was down there, and they were pitching pieces on deck into a circle, and my buddy from Chicago was used to guide them down to the damage below deck, and after he kind of got irked and he says, "Can I go up for some fresh air?" So he sees these Navy divers pitching things onto a circle on deck. He's picking up a piece to look at it, and somebody with an MP badge here put a M16 on his neck and said, "Get the hell out of here and don't come back," because they didn't want anybody to know what they found down there. Until later on, we had 5 torpedoes on that destroyer at midship, so we could shoot at the big stuff too, not just 5-inch projectiles, but we had these 5 torpedo tubes that take out a ship. So it was our job to get in close enough to get them if we could. And so when we got hit, we think there was something hitting the ship that sounded like a big log down below deck. And a couple of the engineers said, "That's what it must be." And then we're taking a turn into port, and so our yeoman and everybody else on board got to study and said, "That was probably intended for an aircraft carrier. We got in the road of it." And the Bonhomme Richard.
So you were part of the picket fence around the aircraft carrier then?
Yeah.
Okay.
We were on picket duty for the fleet, and I think there were several battleships in there. The cruiser Helena from my home state was in there. The New Jersey, I think, was in there. It's there's a pretty large piece of Task Force 77 that was there that day, and creating a piece of history that we didn't know how to handle. And then, so when things settled down, and some of that trash got into our so-called torpedo shack on the main deck, where torpedomen looked at it, and they knew this is a piece off of a torpedo warhead from a gyroscope that directs torpedo fire. And the Navy Department, I wrote to the Navy Department, and they denied any possibility of that, and they watered it down and said it should have done more damage to the ship from the keel to the main deck anyway. And that rear 5-inch gun mount was hoisted up, and it was a denial story. That's what they do when they don't want to go public. So that went on for, I didn't know, for 45 years, until there was a big reunion in Kansas City. And at that reunion, there was the largest group of people we ever had, and I had a handbook of that thick, and I can't find it, because our Captain Thompson asked the crew members to write remembrances of that day. I didn't get that message in time, but I heard about the reunion, and so that was most insightful, to get all of the details of how they wrote the story and all. And we spent time in a Japanese dry dock with this bamboo scaffolding all around the ship. The Japs scaffolding worked, and we got that patch on the ship, and we were able to sailed back to San Diego. But when we arrived in San Diego, there was no greeting crew out there. There were 4 destroyers that pulled in alongside, and I don't think they knew we were coming. I think that was part of that blackout. And so nobody on deck except the workers and kind of disappointed that we weren't welcomed in some fashion.
Sure.
And they couldn't do it, and they didn't do it. And so that was, I went on a second cruise.
Now, how many men were lost?
We had 26 killed and 40 injured out of a 330-man crew, and that's why they say that's the Navy's largest combat loss of the Korean War. Wow. And I'm careful to say I don't know how many corpsmen we lost that were with the Marine Corps on land. I think there were a lot. All the time I'm a kid off the farm, and here's a plaque in the middle of the ship, what we call a midships, where they could pass through the ship. And it was on there talking about Captain, who was he, from World War II days. The first version of the Walke, the DD-416, was sunk at Guadalcanal, and then they rebuilt it in Bath, Maine, and they named it the DD-723, and that was in time to see service at Normandy, and after Normandy they sent it to West Pacific, and then from West Pacific we were mainly in Japan and Korean waters because the war was winding down. I think they spent time off Okinawa because that was a big Navy project taking care of Okinawa, because there was typhoons there that wiped out more ships than the Japs did. But I don't know where it was, but the sister ship, the 724, was a heroic ship, and it's on, that was the USS Laffey, and it's down in South Carolina at the Navy base down there on exhibit with a big carrier. There's a ship that wouldn't quit, and it was on picket duty north of Okinawa, and there were, what they say, 50 Japanese suicide planes passing overhead to Okinawa, and a lot of them took shots at the Laffey, and they couldn't sink it. They bombed everything off of the top of the ship, but they couldn't sink it. And so that's why it's called the ship that wouldn't die. It's amazing how tough those things are with a skin that's only about 1.1 inches thick. And I guess that's thin. That's why they call them a tin can.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Because on battle wagons it was thick.
Yeah. Well, getting back to the incident, where do things stand now with the story? And at that reunion, as you guys compared notes, what was the general consensus? What
corresponding with the Navy Department, with ex-shipmates and all that, and comparing notes and all, and that's the way the story kind of pieced together. But I got several letters from different people in the Navy Department, and nope, no help there. I finally gave up on it. I wanted to get rid of it and forget about it for a while. So
you said then after you got back, you transferred to another ship.
Yes.
Yeah.
The USS Frontier, AD-25. And this was a supply ship for destroyers. It was a destroyer tender. And what would happen is that 4 destroyers would line up outside there in Korean waters sometimes, getting parts and pieces repaired and all of that. And so I got to thinking, these people on this tender's got nice duty. It's much bigger than a destroyer. Huh. They got an ice cream machine on board. They've got chow lines that are not so long, and they're not out on deck in the weather. And I thought, well, why don't I go get on one of them ships? So I did. I put in for a transfer in December of '52. I spent December of '52 on Treasure Island with Navy Waves and others, and had a good time just with elves, and moved all the furniture aside. I was still a storekeeper doing work there, and we had a wonderful Christmas and New Year's while I waited to get on board the Frontier. So I got home on the ship, and then I must have taken a PBY from San Diego up to Treasure Island, waiting to get on that other ship, and then they took me back to off of Treasure Island to catch the ship at Long Beach, I think it was. So I'm on this new ship at Long Beach, learning a new routine, and they went into dry dock for big repairs, just like they do. They do these remodelings, and that ship there, after we came back, they decided to do a single staff post to a tripod. So all the later models got this tripod post to carry a lot more stuff. And Hunters Point Naval Station in San Francisco Bay was a big naval. So one Christmas, I and one of my storekeeper friend from my town, we got leave and we went home for Christmas with warnings that don't be late when you get back. So our plane in Tacoma wouldn't. They had flat tires, and so we had to take overland routing from there by bus to get back to the ship. We get back to Port Chicago, and there's the smell of Vitalis hair oil in the air, like they dumped a truckload of it. And then the crew was loading ammo, and they took a break. And the whole damn crew was on the side of the ship looking at two guys in dress blues coming on board and saying, why are they out? Why are they out there? They should be loading ammunition. So we got on board, and I got a captain's mask and punished for that extra duty, working at night in the office, which we needed to do anyway. And so no problem there. We got loaded with ammo, and then we went back to Korea. And on the second tour, we doggone near took a hit again. We just changed stations in the fleet, and they took a hit. They struck a mine that time for sure, and that wasn't a big killer mine, but it took, I think, a dozen people out, even at that. Geez. And so that was luck, you know. I mean, luck of the draw and all. That we changed battle stations when we did that night. This is in a night mode, and I'm on these cell phones and trying to pick up signals and pass it on, you know. And we had binoculars in the daytime to scan everything, but one guy who had his jaw just a little broken away was a bearable, and he was from an Indian reservation, and the captain depended on him for his eyesight because he could see better than we could with binoculars. And he was a fellow sonar man when World War II was so worried about things because in World War II he doggone near got it in the mess hall, and he wore his May Vest life jacket every day. He took it off at night. Guess what? He was in that blast and he got killed. I mean, irony after irony. We had a lot of WW2 people on there. One guy off of the Lexington who was in that ship when it went down, and there was so many from World War II that they trained us and they taught us a lot. They taught me to leave the Naval Reserve alone unless you know what you're doing and you want to get trapped. So I did. I left it alone. Because almost all of them seemed to join the Navy Reserve out of World War II, which was remarkable that they would do that. So then what happened after that?
Let's stop for a second and talk a little bit about what life was like on a ship. Your sleeping quarters, the food, what you guys did for entertainment when you weren't on duty. Just for us civilians that have no clue, what was life like on a ship?
We were down below deck loading, waiting for something to happen. I remember sitting on deck and admiring these pieces with USA, made in the USA, and oh, it made me homesick. All over the place, there were markers of that fact, you know, and wondering how things were in the USA. If you're below deck, you don't know what's going outside. You can hear gunfire going off and all that, but you kind of wonder. And so I reminisced a lot about then until we got put to work loading ammo or something again. And boy, oh boy, that was the most, it was just something to realize. You're on a piece of metal out here in the ocean and it floats.
Yeah,
Floats? Right. Yeah, unless, and then when you get in them typhoons, you're not sure it floats. And it could doggone near capsize. And a lot of them did off Okinawa. They lost several. And so, but the big ships, they didn't have too much trouble. That was fun watching them just bum through the water. And they didn't have trouble. But we were with several big ships there. The Princeton, one night as an aircraft carrier was launching aircraft, and when they came back in, we were at battle stations, and it was getting dusk, and suddenly as this plane comes in, we said, "Hey, the flight deck's here," and he's there. Sure enough, a big ball of fire erupted there. We got over my earphones that the pilot got out of the ball of fire, and he survived it. But that he was so shot up he couldn't control the plane any better. But that was a kind of wake-up moment too when you see that happening, you know.
Yeah.
And that was on the USS Princeton at that time. And then that was kind of late in my Navy career, and then of course I got to see Hong Kong. You know, when I made that before the transfer on the walk, we got to go to Formosa, now called Taiwan, and then we went to Hong Kong and spent time on shore there, and I could buy a steak dinner for $1.45, and I bought a whole bunch of civilian clothes, brought it on board the walk for my Navy storekeeper buddy to watch over them. Guess what? They disappeared.
Oh no!
Cashmere this and that's, you know. So I lost all of that part of it, and I was thinking about an event that was off the island of Formosa, now Taiwan. General MacArthur decided to take things in his own hand, if you remember the story. He was my hero for World War II. I thought a lot of him. So he got impatient with what was going on in Korea. He wanted to accelerate it. Well, guess what he does? He has the fleet, a good part of the fleet, a couple of aircraft carriers and thus destroyers down there in Formosa Strait between the mainland China. And he launched a fake attack on air bases on mainland China. This is April 19th, 1951. And they launched fake aircraft attacks over a Chinese air base to see if we could get them to fire. And if they did, MacArthur had it planned with a landing party to get on shore right after that. Well, they didn't. Luckily, the Chinese didn't return any fire. And the guys on this destroyer said there must have been 50 junks around there, and all of them probably would roll up a tarp and have a 8mm this or that on board, and it didn't happen. They'd let the fleet alone, and that's the day MacArthur was fired by Truman because of that.
Right.
And that I think was April 19th of '51, and I think at the time, well, where was I? I was either in I think I was in Korean waters because shipmates were down there talking about it, and I got the story from them and a book published by a guy who wrote detail about it. So that was the end of MacArthur, but MacArthur was a hero to the Japs. He broke up the big farms, got rid of those big conglomerates, and the Japanese, I understand, really liked him. They thought he was a great leader. He was filmed alongside of Hirohito, as you probably saw from the film, and he was doing good until he didn't do good. Anyway, he was so anxious to pull the trigger on taking on the Japanese or the Chinese until they sent, at first they thought there was a 1,000,000-man Chinese army crossing the Yalu River between North and South, between China and North Korea. There was about 300,000 when they got it down. That's why the Marine Corps had it so tough in Chosin Reservoir. They got up there in a snowstorm and they couldn't get out of there until they finally got out to port in Humnam and they were evacuated. I was still in mothballs and getting out of the mothballs, so I didn't get in on that action. But that was a sad chapter. And for the Marine Corps, that was a courageous chapter. They fought their way out of there. How they did it, I wonder. Because those mountains were like this. And it was a mean winter. Really a mean winter that year. And I was so glad I wasn't in the Marine Corps or any part of it.
Right.
That's when you realize choices.
How was it on the ship? I mean, you slept in bunks, or what was your sleeping quarters like?
We had the 3-stacker. We always worried the guy on top was drinking and puking.
Yeah.
That was always an issue. Could that happen? I'm on the bottom one, and at last I was bunked with the black crew from the ship's galley, servicing the officers. That was all blacks
And that had to be something new to you, being in Montana. You probably had interacted with many black people back then.
Oh, yeah. I hadn't seen black until I got out of Montana.
Yeah.
And they were great.
Yeah.
One guy had a guitar there, and he was trying to teach me how to strum that guitar. And we were right below a 40-millimeter battle station. And whenever they didn't call general quarters, you could hear that gun rattling at a target that they spotted over there. They called general quarters most of the time, but not all the time, if they could handle it with lesser fire. And so that happened that way. But I got to know those black folks well, and they were great shipmates. And I can't. One was a great pitchball or baseball player, and he had it wind up, and he'd let it go this way, and that damn ball went faster than 90 miles an hour. It was just an incredible skill he had. He was a muscular chap and freckled. He had freckles like me for a black. Yeah. And so he got crossed over with somebody from Ireland or someplace, or Scotland, I think. Because my mother, I found out, I always thought that she was, I knew Dad was German, because he shipped out of the port of Hamburg at 2 years old. And my mother, we always thought she was Irish and English. Well, the way the Irish and English fought, I realized years later, no, she must be something else. And when in the Korean War, about 1950, Ken in Idaho found out that we were related to Sir Francis Drake, who sailed for the British Crown, who was sent out to rob the Spanish ships and gallons to get their gold. They found so much Spanish gold and ingots that they threw their rocks out to load up the gold and silver ingots and took them back to England. And he had a secret deal with the Queen of England to not announce where they were going or where they were headed, but he was intending to sail around the world, and he did, and he lived to tell it. Magellan got killed in the Philippines, but Sir Francis Drake lived to tell it, so he was a big hero back in England. And here we find out we're related. In about 1950, my Aunt Henry Hawkins had 3 girls, and the oldest one, I think the English custom, was to inherit whatever she chose out of those ingots and all, and emeralds that was being distributed back to survivors. And she'd had to live in the UK for 3 years, and she declined them wanting to do that, so she didn't, unfortunately, pass that up. But yeah, we found out that we were part of that family. And Sir Francis Drake was financing, Henry Hawkins was financing Sir Francis Drake with ships and on his voyage and all to make that trip. So part of it was a seedy part, because Hawkins was also transplanting slaves to the New World. And that makes the story kind of muddy.
Yeah.
And he got rich doing it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And what was, back on the ship, what was the food like?
I thought it was good.
Was it? Yeah.
I learned that they could put ketchup on scrambled eggs, and what are they doing? It was good. I didn't realize you could put ketchup on eggs and improve because it was crudely cooked scrambled eggs in a big kettle, so it wasn't like medium grade. It was like rubber grade. Ketchup helped a lot there. But and then every Sunday night we'd have what we call shell on a shingle, which was chipped corned beef on a piece of toast. That's why they named it that. Every Sunday night. So nobody ate on ship on Sunday night if they had liberty and could go ashore. And they went ashore. But otherwise, I got wondering about why didn't I take my supply officer's words of wisdom and go to officer candidate school? I didn't even know what it was, and they talked about it. He thought I had potential to be in the supply corps and get a commission. And you go to the officer's quarters on a destroyer, it turns from gray to pleasant green. All of it's nicely painted and decorated, and leather back chairs and all where they live. It also served as a battle station dressing room. And when I'm on the bridge that day of the hit, I could see them bringing people on the stretchers and blood dripping as they came up into that room to treat them. And so one guy went below deck he came back, he said, I'm looking, I never found a full body anywhere, pieces everywhere. So it really got blasted that way. And the rear bulkhead of the after engine room actually was bulged from the blast. The bulge must have been inward, and if that had ruptured, that ship would have gone down for sure. And the captain was very concerned about it, and that's why he transferred all the fuel and personnel over to the starboard side. But we were lucky to come out of that.
Well, I think, did you say, if I remember right, when we were talking, initially there was the thought of abandoning ship, and he had the idea that,
Yeah, he said over the intercom to other ships, tear, which is code for torpedo. But none of the other ships heard the torpedo. We had a man on deck watching the 3 waves come at us, and the waters were nearly calm that day. So he probably saw what he saw, torpedoes. And well, that's where we think that they were aimed for a different ship. And we just finished launching, and we were doing a turn report sharp enough to take that carrier out of firing position, and that's why we caught what we caught. And so that's why the story exploded. But
and didn't you say too, it was strange that because you were turning, there's no way that it could have been a landmine?
Yeah. Our yeoman and the others on board figured that can't work. A mine will be flushed out to sea here. And so he was correct in thinking that, but that's where the scuttlebutt comes in. We're analyzing this stuff day and night, you know.
Right.
And there's people on there that know a lot about it. And so between the storekeepers and the yeomen, people that were repair crews and torpedo men knew what they were doing. Yeah, we compared notes, and the Navy scuttlebutt is amazingly accurate. So I relied on that. But
and the Navy's never changed their story then?
Never did, and never will. Even after I got what I got, I just decided to let it go.
Yeah.
And I had one article published in the Destroyer magazine, just did last winter. First ever time I had published it, and I saved that one. And I was going to show it to you, but it's down below deck someplace. I don't know where. So.
Yeah. And
then I'm getting out of the Navy.
Well, let me a couple more questions, then we'll get out of the Navy and we'll go to post service. Well, being on ship and being all over the place, what were your options as far as communications, as far as learning news from back home? What were your options back then?
We had a remarkably good mail service through freighters and airplanes, and they, I think most of it was airborne, and they'd get it out there. They'd get it where they could put it on a smaller ship and take it right up on the motorboat alongside whoever's mail it was. And we got almost daily mail service when we were tied in port. That was remarkable. And around Christmas time, there'd be these packages come in, including from my sisters with cookies and candy and all, and everybody would share what they got. You know.
Oh, wow.
That was good stuff.
Yeah.
And I had love letters coming and going. I was chasing a red-haired gal from Fairfield at the time, last year in high school, and she was from a well-to-do family on the Fairfield bench running 1,000 cattle, and so we were making love, but when I came back on leave, she was trying to convert me to Catholicism, and also how to ride a horse. Well, I took to riding the horse poorly, because I didn't know how you handled a horse. Well, she knew how you rode a horse. And so her dad picked up the news about the ship on radio, and my brother, who was bartending in Fairfield, happened to be on break, and he picked up that news at the same time on radio. And so he went out to see Dad. Hey, Dad, did you know? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So there was a big mystery there, because I refused to write letters that were going to be censored.
Right.
So nobody knew where I was or if I was. And I just got stubborn about that, and not writing. And I didn't. Then, let's see. Then I got out of the Navy, April of '54. Truman he was going to extend her.
So you had a 4-year enlistment?
A 4-year enlistment.
Okay.
I should have went to June, but I got out at the end of April because of the Truman doctrine. Not Truman. Truman? Who was president at the time? Because I was Harry Truman. So he let us out early, and I went out early, and I bought a car down there in the meantime that I was using, so I drove home. I wanted to stay down in San Diego. I liked it down there. I was looking at airplanes and how cheap they were. You could buy an airplane for $1,200, and I thought, why don't I do that? I didn't. So then I took this 1950 Chevrolet, which had a brand new rebuilt engine in it, took that to Montana, and I went to work at a place called Firestone Tire in Helena. And I was still chasing the postmaster's daughter at the time, and I ordered out a brand new Chevy coupe, bright red with an ivory top and black interior. It looked like leather, stitching and all. Beautiful car. That was my girlin' car, and I had that for a period of time there, and that was a girl-attracting car. So then I decided one night, the postmaster's daughter, Pat, I was writing letters to at last, she's got too much class for me, so I decided, I don't know. So one night I went to a large civic center community dance in Helena, and people around there and old-fashioned, and I picked off Alice from the pack. She was there working in Helena, and her cousin was with her that night, and we danced the night away. And then later on, 50 years later, I hear she says to her cousin, "That's my man." And so she had me pegged, and I didn't know it.
Oh.
That was, and then I broke off with this Pat, who would have been quite a catch herself, because her dad was postmaster there in Helena and had a prestigious job in the federal service. So that blew apart, and my life in a car carried me through until I replaced it every 6 years. I think I bought a new car. How can I afford this? Well, I did. Every 6 years I ended up with a different car. And so as a result, we've had a lot of different cars, including some second-hand ones. I was a car aficionado. But yeah, that was something, the way that happened in Helena. And I knew I wanted to go to school. This was the fall of '54 coming up, and I'm driving over the railroad tracks after a date with Alice. We died, the first 30 days we were out together every night. And but she was from the old school. You didn't screw around at all. I mean, that was off limits. And so I learned to live with that. And after this one night, I went over a railroad track and I got a heck of a gut ache down here. And I thought, I don't know what's going on. So rather than going out to the Helena Valley where my sister was boarding me, I went out to the VA hospital, and they figured I was passing a gallstone. And if I did, I never had anything like it since. Boy, that was a deadly ache. And I thought I'd get that attached to the Navy, but I couldn't blame it on the Navy. It didn't work. And so I come out of there, and it's fall, and I go down to Bozeman, and that was shocking all to see that beautiful Bozeman campus and foliage that was different again, you know, down there. Beautiful grounds. And I thought, this is going to be a nice place to live for 4 years. So I got into school at the agricultural college there. I took an easy way out because I was on a farm and didn't know what else to do with it. And I worked part-time in the agricultural experiment station through the summers and all. And I was supposed to be what they call an agronomist, which is plant science and plant production. Nobody's heard the word agronomy unless I got close to school down there in ag. So I took that for 4 years and came out with honors on that.
And of course, using the
GI Bill.
GI Bill. Mm-hmm.
Then we got married after a year of that, and the GI Bill went from 110 to 145 with Alice in there. Big deal. And later on, I got to thinking, you know, there was something called combat pay if you were 30 days at sea in hostile waters. Well, guess what? Every time we went out to sea, they'd make us turn around for Japan on the 28th day or thereabouts. So we never qualified for combat pay.
Wow.
Never. Through that whole doggone 2-year period. That was kind of a cheat. But that's what they did. They really economized on things in strange ways. But we got through school. Alice worked her way through. She already had her college or high school background in Chinook and all of that. And so then we got housing there, lived happily ever after in 3 different rentals, and I bought that's when I bought that new Chevy. I went down there, and then we bought a television set. That was in something, black and white. Gamble's, the old Gamble store still existed. My dad came out for graduation. My brother-in-law came out from Fair for graduation, and I was thinking, well, they were curious about what was going on in my world. So I was working with a lead barley researcher at the time, and when he's harvesting the barley to ship out for getting the malting industry started in Montana, I said, hey, save some of that for my brother-in-law in the Fairfield Bench area up there by Great Falls. He did. He got 25 sacks of the Betsy's malting barley, and he went into the malting barley business, and the whole Fairfield Bench became malting barley.
Yeah.
And I felt good about that, getting it started and getting it through him. Just a stroke of luck, working for the right guy who knew all about it, and him putting enough faith in me to try something besides the Yellowstone Valley. That's where we're supposed to go. So, yeah, this new irrigation project up there was just beautiful soils for barley. There wasn't any Anheuser-Busch around there. Great Falls Select had an operation going, but I don't know where they got their barley. So that was a highly successful thing, and that was one of my highlights of my college accomplishments to get that going.
So you got your undergraduate in
Bozeman.
In what field?
Is an agronomy.
Agronomy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was all covered through. And then I started a master's program in agricultural economics, ran out of money after 1 quarter, and then ran out of school. And Alice found me, she found me my first job, which was with the so-called Agricultural Stabilization and Conservation Service, the farm program. Have you ever heard of that? That was back in the 50s when they had an allotment program because the farmers were growing too much food. It wasn't needed anymore. The war ended, and they had this huge surplus building up, so they started this farm program to restrict on how much allotted acres these farmers could grow everywhere across the country. Choteau County, north of Great Falls and Fort Benton, was one of the big wheat growing counties of the nation, 2nd, 3rd largest, and some of the best soils in there. They called it the Golden Triangle, and a lot of rich farmers in there. So they're signing up for this farm program or not. And there's 500 of them here that got smaller farms that love it. And the other 500 that got bigger farms, they love the program. So when we had these public meetings and 1,000 people would show up, and I thought I don't want to monitor these meetings anymore, so I turned it over to the elected county committee, which is rightfully there. I just listened, because these guys are at each other's throats. I mean, they were really angry, and the others thought it was okay. And I saw one guy pay $10,000 fine because he didn't do paperwork on his in time before he got rid of some wheat, hot wheat, they call it hot wheat. And I saw another time when a guy was paying off a hot wheat loan, and he was so angry about it because we said, oh, you made this out to blah blah, could you make it out to the, I don't know, Commodity Credit Corporation? And it got to him so bad that he went to Canada. He sold out and went to Canada, and we never got our money. Well, I could understand why after the fact, and I realized, yeah, that's kind of bad. But the first year, 1959, when I went to a primary elections in June, and they said, well, which ballot do you want? Republican or Democrat? I said, I can't take either. And that's when I became an independent, because you didn't dare get into that farm fight. I knew. The minute I did, they'd label him, and they're watching me. And Mike had one committee man who was John Birch Society, same as anti-Trump people now. And he was trying to get the whole office to join the John Birch Society. I mean, this is in a government office. He shouldn't even have been in there. But he was a county one of the 3 elected committeemen, so he took liberties. And another guy on the committee, he took liberties and he literally planted himself at a desk just to watch what was going on. He was okay, he didn't bother me, didn't bother anybody. A guy by the name of Glasscock, and we kidded him about the name. But he left us alone and we just let him live there. I had a permanent staff of 12 people. I had no courses in college that says how you manage people. And so that 12 exploded to over 50 in the summertime.
Oh, jeez.
Managing and measuring farm acreage and all that. And they had devices to measure it on the photographs. I mean, they really went at that with a vengeance as to, are you overseeded, exceeding your allotment? And they'd come down on them, and if they grew it, it was hot wheat, which you couldn't sell without problems. So I did that and went through so many different committee meetings. I got headaches out of it, and I thought, I don't like this kind of life. So I worked it for 4.5 years, decided I got to do something. It's not so stressful. And so I did. I finally found some, let's see, where did I go next? That was our firstborn was born in 1959. I took that job in August of 58. Alice comes from the Tillman family, who's famous in Montana for their football. And she's got a cousin, Mike, who was 300 pounds and 6'8", and he played for 12 years in the NFL, and he started out with the Vikings. She's got a lot of those genes in her gene pool. And her brother showed up there one day at the office with her newborn, and this kid was so big, everybody in the office was just astonished, and they were trying to figure out, he could beat up Fort Bentonstown bully. He's big. And so they realized where her roots were. I got a lot of respect out of that one trip that she made with a babe in there. And so they respected me, but we were, let's see, I went from that 54 Chevy to a 1960 Dodge Dart. And Dodge only built 1 year that was a good-looking Dodge Dart. After that, they screwed it up. Like Mustang, the Mustang in later years did. But we owned that 1960 edition. And training ground for future banking jobs of the banking industry, and that was what I was gunning for. Because we had loans on everything. Housing, multifamily apartments, condominiums, airports, golf courses, ceramic factories, all kinds of big range projects where they'd have thousands of acres and associations. It wasn't just a simple job in agriculture, and I wanted to get in it. Then they gave me marching orders when my year was up. They said, you're going to go to Cut Bank, Montana on the Blackfoot Indian Reservation, and the people up there were telling me how they packed sidearms when they checked the collateral. They didn't trust the Blackfoot Indian. So I thought, I don't want to live life that way either. So then I found a job in the federal service in Topeka, Kansas, with the Federal Crop Insurance Service, and I was in Topeka for 1 year. Alice stayed here in Helena so the kids could finish high school. That was a tough year on her, kind of unfair. We thought we'd live in Topeka, but at the last one, she worked for 2 attorneys. One was on MacArthur's honor guard, the other was a brigadier general in the Air Force, flew over Korea, and that one got me a job in the Helena as an appraiser, which I knew nothing about, inspecting properties for loans. So I got that job, and I worked in Helena for as long as I could until they said, well, we got staff movement, so I went down to, I took a same job in Casper, Wyoming, and I worked there until they were talking about closing the 7 smallest HUD FHA offices, and that was one of them. I said, I can't risk it. So I moved from there to Seattle, and I became the appraiser out in Seattle, where I finished. And that's, Alice hated it out there. It would rain every day until 4 o'clock, every day. And then she was
So this appraising, this was in real estate. You're out of the agriculture business?
I'm out of the ag business totally when I went to Helena and became a residential appraiser, and I knew nothing about it. A little bit of appraising of farm realty and some occasional appraising of properties in FHA, where I hope to be that agricultural banker. But it wasn't enough to get me there, and I felt bad about that. So when I got up to Seattle, I went to night school for 2 years to get eligible to take a license exam for an appraiser, because they made good money. Those people were rolling in dough, and it was so busy at the time. And I finished the school in Seattle, and I had to wait for a government buyout, and that took a year. So Alice is all by herself again, living happily ever after in Loveland. She enjoyed that. She painted the house while I was gone.
How did you get to Loveland during that?
Well, we bought a new Maxima in Portland, and then she took that out to Loveland because she left her job with City Light in Seattle City Light, but she saved everything she made with those people and expanded that into a pretty good bankroll. Came out here as our plan was to, because our two sons were living in Colorado. One was in school, and the other one was working for a Marathon Oil Company. And Alice and older son both worked in Casper for a while with Marathon Oil Company. And he had a prestige job there as a oil trader. He went from there to Houston, to Findlay, Baton Rouge, and Findlay, Ohio, until he got a chance to get out of oil, which his wife found him. But that's another story.
Yeah.
And so we moved here because of them.
Gotcha. So how long ago then did you retire?
I retired September 29th of 95.
95.
And I thought, can we get by? So I drew down on my my federal thrift plan, and I activated Social Security early, and I shouldn't have. That's a mistake. And I thought, can we get by? Since I came out here, I took the final exam for appraiser in Greeley, passed it, got my license, and got disenchanted with the market. I thought, I don't know this market. I'm going to get sued and screwed the first thing I go into it. So I dropped out of appraising, because it was kind of high risk on that part of it. And Alice wasn't pleased with me for doing that. So I did. And I never, after that, never worked again. And that was from September 29th of, what did I say, 59.
95?
95, yeah. So I've been in retirement for some time now.
Yeah. And how have you filled your retirement? The hobbies, travel, how's retirement been for you?
Did we ever? We traveled, we spent a month going to the different places. That was fun.
Well, Dale, I want to thank you, one, for sitting down to tell your story today, but two, I want to thank you for your service to our country.
Well, thank you. Now you're going to have to take the cuss words out of the film. This is a battle star I really earned. It tells about everything that went top secret, and it shows that I was a storekeeper in the Navy with my eagle and cross keys. Every vocation had different insignia down there to identify, but I got a hair permanent here by default because the ship's storekeeper's wife cooked chicken dinner for us, and then she says, hey, let me fix your hair up, me and a partner. So I got my first hair treatment right there. It's not really natural. And that was, this is Hong Kong Harbor, 1951, and we were at anchor, and locals would come on board the ship with supplies they'd try to sell you, which they would get on deck and on board, and we would go on shore and buy cheap everything, jewelry, clothing. That was a wonderful place to be, and we're so sorry the Brits lost that from their lease. And now they're imposing a different rule, but the whole ship's crew is on board here.
Any chance you can point? Any chance you can point yourself out?
I'm down here in a white uniform, about right there, I think. Where it's kind of hard to make out. This is a DD-723, a ship that won 20 battle stars in Europe and everywhere in Asia. And our story got bad when a torpedo hit just ahead of this 5-inch gun mount here, and something bounced off the ship right about there. We think it was a torpedo that didn't blow. This one blew. It raised the deck up and cut a hole all the way down to the keel. Literally cut the ship in half. There was one guy up here who was in a bunk, face up, and a big hole above his head, and you could look in there and see him still lying there until we got into port in Sasebo, and they could pull him out of there.
Oh, boy.
10 people were washed out to sea. 10 more were down below deck, and we were loading them onto another destroyer, the USS Hubbard, that was nearby, and we were out to sea, and the gun control director up here picked up a couple of MiG fighters coming at us. We thought, this is right after noon. We thought, oh my gosh, we're going to have to go fight them off. Well, our aircraft took care of them, so we were okay there. But that was the main damage, all in this back area here. I was here at midships in the supply office, and I got on the port side in time to see this column of smoke and water come back down.
Wow.
And then I knew that we were in big trouble. And these 5-inch guns are the 5-inch diameter shell head, and they're about 2 foot long of metal that flies 12 miles and hits train and troop movements on shore. And of course cruisers and battleships would shoot over the top of us and go further inland, and we were just an auxiliary to protecting the fleet, really.
Right.
Not for real. But they were really good. The fire control people here could spot a target on land and direct the gunfire there, and we could get quite fortunate with hitting targets out of sight. So that was, but Korea was a bad place to fight a war. It's so mean over there. And these waters were like here, this picture, quite calm. And that's why a guy saw torpedo pattern coming at us. The water wasn't rough enough to rough up the image. But it's the Navy Department rejects that story.
Right.
And we know better on board the ship. So
Very
it's a piece of history that got stuck in time.
Sure.
I'm glad to get it aired. I waited forever, and I'm so